Executive, the Community Relations Executive for BBVA, now part of PNC, in Texas. So the Community Relations Executive for Texas. I'm happy that you all are here to join us. And in this session, you'll hear from philanthropic and nonprofit county government leaders, how their respective states and communities are converting motels and hotels as rapid acquisitions into both emergency shelter for homeless and into permanent housing. Examples include more recent efforts in Oregon and Minnesota to provide shelter for community members impacted by wildfires and COVID-19, as well as multi-year efforts in Texas to expand housing options. We'll hear about the often complex financial structures that they've cobbled together, often at great speeds, to make these projects come together, and how developers have navigated zoning challenges and NIMBY efforts to stop such projects. So just a few reminders, questions will be taken at the end of the session. You can enter questions either or after the panel discussion, raise your virtual hand, and when you're called upon, please unmute yourself. Also, we appreciate your feedback on the workshop. So we will have a live poll at the end of the session. Very quick and easy, but it'll be very helpful for the conference coordinators. So now I'd like to introduce our panelists. We have Megan Lowe, Program Officer with Housing and Economic Vitality for Oregon Community Foundation. Walter Moreau, the Executive Director of Foundation Communities here in Austin, Texas. And then Julia Welle Ayres, the Director of Housing and Development with Hennepin County in Minnesota. So first up, we'll have Megan.
Thanks, Yolanda. I appreciate the introduction, and I'd like to share a few slides with all of you today. I'm here to talk on behalf of Oregon Community Foundation, which is a statewide charitable foundation in the state of Oregon, about Project Turnkey, a motel acquisition initiative to provide rapid shelter and permanent housing in a single investment. See if I can get my slides to advance. There we go. In Oregon, like many of your regions probably, we were facing a housing crisis well before the pandemic hit. Our lack of affordable housing put us in the most unwanted top 3 list, the top 3 states with the highest per capita rates of people experiencing homelessness. We were right up there with California and New York. Then the pandemic arrived, upending our already strained social safety nets. In Oregon, 40% of our shelter beds are in temporary winter warming shelters that are not able to open fully during the pandemic due to social distancing and safety precautions. So in the summer of 2020, many of our community partners began worrying about the winter session ahead, the winter shelter season ahead. And then our fires arrived. In a single weekend over Labor Day of 2020, fires ravaged our state and decimated 4,500 residential structures in a matter of days. Many of those homes were naturally occurring affordable housing, such as manufactured homes, that tend to be underinsured and are very difficult to replace. And at that point, our alarm bells began ringing full force over concern for the winter season ahead. In response, Oregon's legislature allocated $65 million for a competitive grant program to allow local entities and nonprofit organizations to acquire hotels and motels for use as shelter in the short term and then convert to affordable housing in the long term. Oregon Community Foundation, where I work, was asked to administer the grant program. We quickly pulled together a community of advisors and worked closely with state and local partners to develop grant criteria and a process that allowed for the rapid acquisition of properties while centering equity and local community needs. And I just want to note that we all know shelter is only ever a gateway to housing. It's never the end solution. but the strategic response of motel conversions means that they accomplish both the immediate shelter that we need right now and the long-term housing that addresses the root cause of homelessness in one single investment. Over a period of about 7 months, 19 organizations successfully went through the grant application process to ultimately be awarded hotels or motels. A total of 867 rooms were brought online in our state, and that represents about a 20% increase in Oregon's shelter capacity. It was really important to us to have a diverse geographic representation for this program, and we were proud of the ability to stand up shelter, sometimes for the very first time in communities in Oregon. The average cost per unit was about $87,000, and this is about a third or a fourth of the cost of building new affordable housing in the state of Oregon. These are some of the properties that were acquired through this process by local entities. We have recently published a very comprehensive retrospective report for our legislature on the process, on the things that we learned along the way. It was an ambitious project with a short time frame, and it's available on our website at the address listed here. So today I'll just highlight one success and one challenge that we faced for all of you. One major success for us was that we hired 2 development consultants who were able to work closely with the applicants in our program to conduct due diligence, appraisals and environmentals, property inspections, to quickly assess which properties were the right fit for the local community needs, while also ensuring that we were being good stewards of state funds. One challenge that we had, which will come as no surprise to many of you, was around land use. We had land use policies locally that were often in conflict with our rapid timeline, and many of our applicants did not have enough time to go through this lengthy process and remain competitive in our grant program. Fortunately, Oregon's legislature passed a bill during the session to allow hotel and motel acquisition for shelter or housing to be exempt from local land use policies. That helped a number of our applicants successfully move forward that otherwise would have been stymied. Finally, I just want to touch on the model of non-congregate shelter. Studies are showing that this is an emerging best practice. Giving people a room with privacy, a place to decompress, allows them the ability to focus on navigation to permanent housing. One of our Project Turnkey awardees has seen 73% of its guests move to permanent housing over the past 8 months. That's an extraordinarily high success rate, especially given that the population was primarily people experiencing chronic homelessness prior to that point who were unwilling to come into a congregate shelter. So we believe that this model of non-congregate shelter will outlast the pandemic. And then one last note that this was a deeply collaborative process from start to finish as we looked and researched and rolled out this concept all the way through implementation. And even now, as we want to ensure the longevity and long-term success of these projects, it only happened because of the collaboration of the organizations and individuals you see listed on this slide here. I want to thank all of them, and Oregon Community Foundation was truly honored to be entrusted by the state to work with our community partners for this project. And now I'll turn it back over to you, Yolanda. Thanks so much for letting me share.
Great, thank you, Megan, for those words and for sharing with us what you all are doing in Oregon. So our second panelist is Walter Moreau, Executive Director of Foundation Communities. Walter, I'll let you take it away.
Great. Thank you for inviting me to speak. I'm in Austin, Texas. I've been the director at Foundation Communities. We're a nonprofit housing and service provider. I've been here 25 years, and my passion has really been to create beautiful and well-managed affordable housing and the types of health programs and education programs that really help residents succeed. I actually got my first the housing bug when I traveled from Texas to Los Angeles and did a conference 30 years ago with Skid Row Housing Trust and the SRO Corporation of LA, and saw some of the hotels that they had converted. So I brought that back to Texas, worked on a couple of projects. I just have one slide. Let me pull it up right now. That shows the history of our supportive housing. Our first community at Foundation Communities 20 years ago for folks who were homeless or at high risk was our Garden Terrace nursing home. We found an abandoned nursing home on 8 acres of land, not downtown, about 5 miles south of downtown. Pretty much turned into a gut renovation project, and we swore we'd never do a nursing home again. So we then decided, let's get an extended stay hotel. Extended stays already have the plumbing and the electricity in the right places. So we bought a pretty rough extended stay hotel, the Hearthside Inn, and we turned that into Spring Terrace in 2006. It was a U-shaped building, so we took all the parking lot out in the middle and created a beautiful fenced courtyard. Interior corridors so that we control entry. We have 24/7 staffing. We can see who's coming in and out of the building. Then we had success with that. We bought an old Ramada that we turned into Skyline Terrace with 9% credits. We had to add kitchenettes, very expensive. Then we went back to an extended stay, Arbor Terrace. We took a break, and really the last 4 developments that we've built were new construction using 9% tax credits and lots of other funding. None of our supportive housing communities have debt. So a little bit different from the presentation in Oregon. This is permanent housing, so folks are on a lease and able to stay longer term. The need for supportive housing in Austin is huge. I'm sure that's true in your communities too. So the city approached us and said, can you get another extended stay hotel in the works? I'm proud to say that a month ago, we bought the Town Place Marriott Suites, and it's closed now. We're getting the dollars together to renovate and welcome home 123 residents by next summer. I think main message today, I'm happy to share any specifics about the challenges of converting the hotel, NIMBY challenges, ADA, environmental, relocation. But generally, the hotel conversions have been cheaper and faster, and it works. And you should do it. If you've got an inventory of extended stay, especially hotels, that you can convert into housing and get online, I really believe that it's a strategy that makes sense. I'll stop there and pass it back to you, Yoli.
Great. Thank you, Walter. And thank you for sharing what Foundation Communities is to curb homelessness and provide affordable housing to those in Austin, Texas. And Julia, I will now turn it over to you to share with us what you all are doing in Minnesota.
Thank you, Yolanda.
I'm not walking around in the 60s, Carol. I'm not doing that.
Whoops.
Nobody's making me walk around in the fucking, no. It'll be nice.
All please remember to put yourselves on mute. Thank you very much.
And thanks, Walter and Megan, for excellent stories of the great work you've been doing that I now have to follow up on. So I'm going to share with you a couple of slides too about Hennepin County's work that we've been doing in the last years. And I'll start by just, reminding folks, Hennepin County is the largest county in Minnesota and includes the city of Minneapolis. That's where we're located. We're home to about 500,000 households. We have a higher proportion of renters than most Midwest cities. And about a third of households meet the definition of housing cost burden. In our county, about 3,000 people a year experience homelessness, and the vast majority of those are single adults. A growing number of those are unsheltered. Over the last 5 years, using new policies, new strategies, and new housing, we've shrunk the number of families experiencing homelessness from 250 a night to 50 families per night. And we're so proud of that success. And because of that, we've now been turning our attention towards our single adult and chronic homelessness, trying to find those same results. So I start with that data and with these images that I hope you can see here, because I want to give context for Hennepin County's SRO conversion project. So on Christmas of 2019, back when we still called coronavirus different things, a terrible fire destroyed a building called the Drake Hotel. For years, the county had leased units at the Drake for overflow shelter for families, but the Drake also rented out the rest of its rooms week by week to folks who had income but just couldn't pass traditional tenant screening criteria or afford the usual $1,000 rent for a studio apartment. It was relatively easy for the county to replace the overflow shelter, but it took great resources to rehouse those renters. So for this group of people, who they actually make up about a quarter of our shelter guests, folks who are, basically entry-level workers. For this group, we have a huge gap in our housing continuum between, pay for stay shelter and permanent supportive housing. And that fire just made it crystal clear our great need to not only protect and preserve, but to make more of this kind of single room occupancy housing. So in early 2020, with steadily increasing single adult homelessness and older adult homelessness, and having just lost a critical housing asset, that's when the COVID-19 pandemic hit the county. So that was the context for our project. So here's what it looked like. So the county began leasing hotel rooms in March of 2020 to move elders and people with pre-existing conditions out of congregate shelters. Ultimately, we leased around 600 hotel rooms for this purpose. By May, by June, we got approval from our board to begin looking for hotels and other buildings to purchase. The county with this action was hoping to replace our leasing expenses at the hotels with capital expenses, which would then leave the county with assets that could be repurposed for affordable housing. So this early approval last year, together with our existing understanding of the dire need for more deeply affordable housing, especially for single adults, that combination is what allowed us to create a really detailed set of criteria for ideal properties. So then we sent the county's land acquisition group to go out as our realtors in June, and they had to work really fast. So in the meantime, as they were looking for properties, we were working with cities, on a parallel track on the zoning, licensing, code criteria. So a couple notes on that piece. In the end, we bought 3 hotels, 1 hotel, 2 motels. They didn't require any zoning or building changes because we were planning to only operate them temporarily as a shelter. And in that vein, they look like hotels. So that worked well, especially since we had an amenable city with very similar goals to ours. But we also in those buildings provided security and staffing services in order to mitigate impacts on the neighborhood and in order to secure their approval from the city. The 4th building we bought was a treatment center, and that one did require some zoning and licensing changes, but we were able to find a newer sort of niche specialized use option that worked for us and worked for all parties. So that took a lot of legwork on just exploring and negotiating and seeing if that zoning would work for this project, and it did. But I have to name that we were so lucky to be locating these properties in Minneapolis. So all 4 of these projects are located in Minneapolis because Minneapolis was already in the process of drafting and approving a single room occupancy ordinance. So that's what we're working with them the whole time. And that new ordinance that was passed this July is going to pave the way for final changes once we're ready. And then I'll just say one of the properties you'll see here in January launched right away as permanent housing. And the other 3 are operating as combination of protective shelter and isolation shelter. These properties have really been instrumental in both keeping our homeless population safe for people that are in those properties. Even now with the Delta variant, we're using them even more than we thought we would at this point. But it's also helping to reduce our census from the leased hotels. We hope to be out of all of our leased hotels by the end of the year, which will be a wonderful success. So the properties we got, here they are, just to show you the scale of what we bought. There are again 2 motels, a downtown boutique hotel, and a former treatment facility. You can see very different prices for all of those. And again, we were using some pandemic funds as well as just HRA and county funds to make this happen. To gather some important notes here, they're all, again, in Minneapolis, but they're all in neighborhoods that are bikeable and walkable and have bus transit. And they all have amenities like a Walgreens nearby, and they all have entry-level job opportunities nearby. You'll see each building is small, mid-sized. And again, this is because before we bought, we were looking at both the short-term pandemic use and the long-term permanent housing use. And so we had a pretty strict criteria for what we would be willing to buy. And we're really excited about these 4 buildings. Again, for our protective shelters, we didn't have to do much repair to meet code. But one of the buildings we bought needed just significant repairs on a lot of deferred maintenance. So heads up on that. A lot of these hotels, the beautiful ones you were just showing, Megan, they just look just like ours and they need a lot of work to just bring them back up to habitability. And then the building that we purchased that's currently permanent, again, didn't require building conversion to meet code, but it didn't require conversion to meet code, but we did need to do some repairs to convert specialized treatment centers, such as quiet rooms. We had to fix those spaces and convert them into bedrooms. So as we permanently house people from the hotel shelters again, and then as the pandemic wanes, we're gonna basically, mothball the 2 motels and the hotel, complete some additional repairs and improvements, and then transition those 3 to permanent housing as well. But I'll end by highlighting the one that is already converted to permanent. So before 2020, the county never owned or operated residential facilities, outside of its corrections department, and didn't plan to create a property management or public housing department. That was never anything we had in mind. Instead, our plan with these properties was to maintain ownership for tax and authority purposes, to then lease the properties to affordable housing operators, and then to continue supporting the property as needed with a modest capital reserve. So for this example, Hennepin County purchased this building. This was the one that was formerly a treatment facility in November. And then it leased it to an excellent organization called Alliance Housing on December 1st, and then completed some updates quickly in December and moved residents in starting December 30th. I have all hands on deck on this one. Alliance Housing, this is important to note, is a nonprofit housing provider with a 30-year record of providing extremely low-cost housing. Their particular niche and expertise is in running rooming houses for people exiting homelessness. It's done for a long time, and everybody knows the name of the guy that you call. Alliance works to keep its rents below $450 a month, and only uses the very loosest of tenant screening criteria, only the things that actually have any impact on health and safety of a building. They have no on-site services in the bulk of their buildings, and they see an average tenure of 4 years for its renters. This building in particular has 31 dwelling units. They have a stack of shared bathrooms down the middle. So all the bathrooms and shower units are centralized. And then there's a shared nice big kitchen and dining facility in the basement that again is just shared by the residents. There's no meal program. Each renter has an individual month-to-month lease for $375 a month, and they pay that out of their own income. We don't have to have, one of the barriers for this population of renters is that because their income fluctuates or because of documentation concerns, they might not be able to keep up with the documentation required for Section 8, things like that. So we wanted to make sure to have the rent stay low without the renters having to redocument their income or eligibility over and over again. There's an on-site caretaker, which is an important part of the model. Tenants agree to house rules to make the building work effectively. And then again, so the way it works, the county owns the building. The Alliance Housing collects rents and they operate the building on those rents. The county paid a small lease up reserve to just pay for the gap in rent when they were first getting filled. And then the HRA also holds a modest capital reserve for larger capital projects that need to happen on the building. We did use the lessons learned from this project to create a single room occupancy task force report to be able to facilitate the development of more projects like this. It's under its final review right now, so I can't share a link just yet, but I'll be excited to share that as that becomes available. We learned so much through development of this project. And our goal is to basically replicate this as much as possible. We're hoping as many as 1,500 units in the next 10 years. We think if we can hit that goal, we won't have to have people using shelter for housing anymore because there'll be housing they can actually afford in the community. For Hennepin, our biggest challenge is just going to be finding other property managers with the same expertise as Alliance, so we can really bring this to scale. So thanks for letting me share all of this. Take a little bit of time. Yolanda, I'll pass it back to you for the questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Julia. That was wonderful to learn what you all are doing there, and really how all of these projects can work in different parts of the country. So let's go ahead and go into our panel discussion, and we'll get into the audience Q&A in a second. But I wanted to hear what kind of advice the three of you as experts would have for moving elected officials, banks, and investors towards support for converting motels and hotels. I mean, as someone in the financial institution world, we're always looking to be persuaded and convinced that this is where we should be investing our funds. So Walter, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I think if for those of you attending, the word of the day should be ARPA, American Recovery Plan Act. The biggest investor potential right now are the cities and the counties and the states, because everybody's got this one-time money. It's a tremendous opportunity across the country to invest heavily in building a bigger supportive housing stock. Our county just committed $100 million, half of their ARPA money, to new supportive housing. There's 9 different nonprofit organizations that all pitched projects and got funding. So we're going to do a new construction, and we are probably not going to use tax credits, which is super exciting. So I think, Yoli, your question about how do banks and other investors get involved, ideally in our supportive housing, we actually don't use bank loans, although the tax credits are still competitive, and we've found plenty of investors, financial institutions, insurance companies, and the like, going for the credits if we have them. ARPA, just remember that. If you have one takeaway from today, it's go get ARPA money.
Megan or Julia, anything you'd like to add, perhaps more around moving elected officials for supporting projects like this?
I think Walter had the keyword of the day, which is certainly adequate and correct. In Oregon, we've been really fortunate to have incredible legislative champions for housing for many years. I would say one thing that I would encourage states to look at if they're thinking about states or regions, if they're thinking about allocating funds for housing in this way, would be to look at what complementary policies might need to be explored at the same time as the funding. For us, for example, House Bill 2163 passed 5 or 6 months into our application process, and looking back, ideally, it would have been passed at the same time that the funds were allocated to allow for streamlined land use and zoning. So think about what policies might be complementary and try to award those or legislate those at the same time as you're allocating funds to allow for rapid acquisition.
Great, thank you.
That's great. And I would just say on the elected's edge, I'm certainly no expert on this, but we all have such common goals. And I think it starts with really a conversation about explaining what a conversion looks like, what the benefit is of utilizing underutilized properties such as a motel or maybe even an office building that no longer is being used downtown, and what it looks like to have quality, dignified, affordable housing where people can be building community. So I think that kind of talking point really makes a big difference and goes a long way in moving that way. And then I would also just agree with what Walter said, we've got to find ways to get non-amortized capital into these buildings because they can't afford that debt ongoing.
Great, thank you. One more question, then I'll open it up to the audience because there are some great ones in the chat that I'm seeing pop up. So what have been some of the more typical construction challenges you've all seen and faced bringing these places up to code? And Julia, let's go with you.
Sounds great. Well, I mentioned that we have one project that we are lovingly calling the money pit. So just acknowledging that when we're looking for these projects, so for Hennepin, again, we were looking for projects that could be converted to affordable single room occupancy. We didn't want to have a brand new 100-unit hotel. That's just too many units for the kind of use we were looking for. So then you're looking at a 40, 50-unit motel, and those were built in an era where the construction design wasn't as durable. So I think just generally a heads up, the general architecture of those buildings is fantastic for permanent housing. It just needs a lot of work to bring up to date. And then beyond that, the biggest thing is, the more rehab you do, the more you want to make it excellent housing, the more you're meeting generally thresholds that trigger everything, environmental review, ADA. So what we're really encouraging people to look at is what do we need to do to focus on habitability, on health and safety? How are we getting it up to fire code? How are we making sure it's dignified and that our renters will really want to live there and they'll want to take care of it? And then from there, again, taking that story to our elected officials to say, can we make this work? So I think it really has to start from the renter and what the renter really wants and what the renter can afford, and then building that way.
Great. Walter?
The first 3 hotel conversions I did, I remember each time I'd walk around the hotel and I'd think, wow, this is really nice. I'd get excited about it. This doesn't need anything. I say, or maybe $1 million, we'll take out the carpet, we'll take out the drapes, we'll change up some furniture. And it always costs 2 or 3 times what I initially thought. The hotel renovation we're doing now, I'm proud to say, I thought it would cost $4 million and it's coming in around $4 million. Somebody asked the question in the chat about design, and there's just all kinds of things you don't think about. You need mailboxes, you need a good adequate laundromat. You need community space where you can have a potluck dinner some night or other get-togethers. We spend a lot on outdoor space. We want to create secure courtyard areas. We have a lot of residents who smoke, and we got to, be thoughtful about that. We have lots of residents with therapy animals. So our latest property has a dog run and a dog wash station. We put in our very first bed bug sauna to cook furniture and try and remove bed bugs. Do a lot of green building. We're going to own these buildings for a long, long time, and anything we can do to bring down water and energy use in thoughtful ways is critical. We get rid of all the carpet we can and other upholstery drapes and furniture and so forth. What I would just say on design is the field around the country, we've collectively done a lot of hotels. We've built a lot of supportive housing. So there are resources out there. There are other groups you can find probably within driving distance to walk the halls and see what worked and what didn't work around front desks and lobby areas and computer labs and fitness centers and all that good stuff, all the shared spaces.
Great. Thank you, Walter. Megan?
I think Walter and Julia did a wonderful job. I'll just add one additional challenge for us. In Oregon, we really prioritized renovation funds around safety and habitability, but also ADA compliance. That was very important to our legislature, and it's expensive. You're thinking about not just an individual room, but also access to common spaces like kitchens or laundry facilities, and that tends to be a very expensive renovation, especially in some of the older buildings where even door frames maybe need to be extended. The other issue that we are facing right now in many of these properties is the supply chain constraints. So much is months out in terms of shipping and delivery, and then labor shortages, especially in our rural communities.
Great, thank you.
I would echo Megan on the ADA work. It's an easy miss in an old hotel. It can be frustrating. We've got people that are in tents, in campgrounds, in wheelchairs with zero accessibility. And then I got to fight. We want the building to be as accessible as possible, but then sometimes you run into very costly repairs that could make a project infeasible.
Yeah, great, thank you all. So let me turn it over to the audience now. I'm going to pick a few that I'm seeing in chat, and you know, if you all want to raise your hands as well, if we can get through them, because we do have at least 15 minutes. So let me start off with Paola Gutierrez. She asks, the rules and agreements may be one of the biggest challenges. How do you keep fidelity of the rules without having tenants fall back into homelessness and or behavioral issues? Are there models with case managers / social workers in addition to the caretaker? And Walter, let me take this one. I am the former board chair of Foundation Communities with Walter years and years ago. And so I remember us doing Foundation Communities doing an amazing job making sure they had social workers, licensed social workers on site at these properties, and how they take Foundation Communities takes a very holistic approach to housing individuals. Whether it's helping them find a job, any type, workforce development, whether helping them get insured, and certainly having social workers on staff. But Walter, I'll let you give more details specific to what they're talking about, rules and whatnot in these facilities.
Yeah, we definitely have community rules. We have an approach of what we call blended management. So every property has a property manager, but there's also a service manager and their team. And everybody on the service side and the property management side, they all report to the same director. That has been sounds common sense, but it was a big shift 5 years ago to bring the property management and the service folks all under one umbrella. We have enough 24/7 desk clerks between 7 properties that's its own team as well. And so we're constantly hiring and moving people around, and there's a desk clerk supervision team. The social services are crucial. You've got to have, and as I think about the last 20 years, our investment in the services just keeps growing and growing. We find partners, Mental Health Authority and others that are excited to work with us because we're a real solution for their clients as well. Yeah, so I'll stop there. It definitely, the management and the services are one of the big challenges, but you can do it.
Yeah. Megan or Julia, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I'd love to if I could. And I totally agree with Walter. And I love when the services and the management can be blended together. That's a beautiful model. And in Hennepin in particular, what we found was that our biggest gap for single adults was actually in independent housing, just independent, really, really cheap housing. We have people who don't need supportive housing, and we had people who couldn't maintain eligibility for it. So the kind of housing that Hennepin is focusing on with this project in particular is, again, housing where there's a live-in caretaker whose job is really to be eyes and ears, to be a coach, to help people think through their conflicts, but they're not a case manager. They're actually just somebody who, oftentimes formerly was a tenant in a different building and then demonstrated that they really have a knack for talking with their roommates. And so that model really focuses on the month-to-month lease, the coaching, the relational management, and that one, it's really about engaging with that each tenant and engaging on a motivation level. And again, in that model, our tenure is often 4 years that our renters are able to stay in that setting. So good to think about your full inventory across the property and think about who are those operators and managers who have that relational approach with their renters.
Great. Yeah, let's go to another question, unless Julia, you'd like to add anything. If not, we will move on to James Miller asks, I have been involved in a number of property renovations. Occupied property renovations are extremely challenging and require significant coordination. It's actually not a question, but this is true, James. Obviously, you've heard from our 3 experts here how it really is a balancing act and kind of a juggling act as well to do this. Another question we have from Eric. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, Yoli, I was gonna say we ought to touch on NIMBY, and somebody just put that question in the chat, and we're gonna run out of time.
Perfect. Yes. What about NIMBY? Yes, strategies for success. So let's go with that one.
I will just add my 2 cents that we've been in a bunch of NIMBY battles, and I'm never going to change the minds of the people who are fighting us. So we have focused on organizing supporters. And if we have elected official support and we bring our supporters to the table, we've prevailed. So that's my biggest advice, is don't beat your head against the wall trying to change the minds of the opponents. Organize your supporters.
Great. Julia, would you like to add to that? Any advice for fighting NIMBY?
No, I think that was very, very well said. I think listen to the people who are concerned, because oftentimes their concerns are things you can give very strong, very objective responses to. But good response, Walter. Thanks.
Megan, would you like to add anything?
Well, I think Walter said it so succinctly, but I'll just add that there's a narrative shift that needs to happen in our country, that homelessness is not some sort of a personal or moral failure, it's a systemic failure. And I think we need to highlight that, and we need to share that narrative when we can, to help really shift the truth, shift the ground, I guess, ground truth, what people are saying and how they associate people experiencing homelessness in their own community. And one thing that we saw that was really helpful and effective around Oregon, especially in our more rural communities, was the local people experiencing housing insecurity, really telling their stories and helping their community understand that putting transitional housing, permanent supportive housing, or even a temporary shelter in their community would benefit their own local community members. So I think there's an important narrative shift that I hope we can continue to accelerate.
I have a little story to share. When we bought the Ramada and converted it, our biggest, loudest opponent was a guy named Bob. And he went down to City Hall and ranted about how this was going to be a magnet for drugs and crime. And but we bought the Ramada, we renovated it, turned it into Skyline Terrace. And then fast forward 8 years later, we are in the same neighborhood group trying to build Bluebonnet Studios, and we need neighborhood support to get the credits. And Bob walks in the room at the neighborhood meeting, sits in the back of the room, just staring at me the whole time. At the end, he near the end, we're doing questions, and he raises his hand and he stands up and he says, "I just want to say to my neighbors that I fought the Ramada. But Foundation Communities renovated it and they manage it, and it's beautiful and it's great. They've kept their promise, and I was wrong. And I'm standing here in front of my neighbors today saying I'm going to support Bluebonnet Studios." And just gave me chills, because like every now and then you can convert somebody. You can change that narrative. So it can be done.
Yeah. Thank you, Walter. I remember going to several of those neighborhood meetings, and the first one I ever went to, I'd like to think of myself as being pretty tough, but I left that one crying because I just could not believe with how negative the stories were. And so that's amazing to hear that.
There's actually a little bit to the story I forgot, and I found out later that Bob had become a friend of a resident, a former addict, who went to his church, who lived at the hotel. So he had a conversion because he actually got to know a resident that lived there. That makes all the difference.
Exactly. Yeah. Thank you all for sharing that. So we have a couple of questions that seem related, more about, logistics. So specifically Stevens Square residents. Did you say there are shared bathrooms on each floor and one community kitchen in the basement? Does each room have a mini fridge and microwave? And then also more like the logistics of these shared kitchens, cleanliness, who takes care of all this? So I'm just curious how that works.
Yeah, I saw a couple of questions in there I can respond to. So at Stevens Square residents, the rents are at $375, which is about 15% AMI affordability. And the operations are run 100% on those rents. So we're focusing just on habitability and on the renter experience in that, and it's working, which is great. So each unit some of them have a sink, but they all have, like you said, a mini fridge and a microwave, and so they store their own food in their units, and that just reduces a lot of conflict. and they can eat in their own units. And then the shared kitchen in the basement has, stove and a fridge and a lot of nice amenities if they want to actually cook or share a meal together. There's also a nice laundry facility in the basement, as Walter mentioned. That's very important to have that. And then the bathrooms at Stevens Square residence are all centralized in a central stack, but there's one set per floor. So bathrooms and showers, and I think a tub on each floor. And we also separated the floors by sex as well, by gender. And that helps a little bit with reducing conflict. Hope that helps.
Great. I have another question. I've kind of not in the audience chat here, but what lessons have you learned managing the lease up, process and finding the right candidates? I mean, we all know that rooms are limited. There are waiting lines the moment we build something. So how do you find the ideal candidate, if you can call it the ideal candidate? Megan, how about I turn it over to you?
I'm probably the least experienced of the three of us to address that, because these are our applicants, our wonderful recipients who are engaged in that work. But as part of their application, each of our local owners or operators outlined exactly how they would do that. And most of them are using some sort of a coordinated referral entry process, but also recognizing the inherent bias that's in many of those sort of systems, those discrete formulas. They also tried to partner with culturally specific providers and other organizations in their community to ensure that there were direct referral resources when possible as well, to hopefully have a more diverse and inclusive referral process. It really does vary. We have a wide variety of types of operations. Some of the properties are supporting survivors of domestic violence. Others are supporting fire survivors. Others are supporting just veteran populations, for example. So the referral process of sort of who is housed and how is really up to those individual locally owned operators.
Great, thank you, Megan. Julia or Walter?
So with our first project so far, we learned a lot, and we'll use that for our other projects going forward. We worked outside of our homeless coordinated entry system, but kind of parallel to. So important for us was to have a case manager as a part of the referral process. So it's our operator, it's Alliance Housing, who is the one who takes applications and walks through the process. But the referrals come from a case manager who works with people on our chronic homeless list. So we're using this strategy intentionally to reduce the number of people experiencing chronic homelessness in Hennepin County. The case manager is an important part of that conversation. They help explain what the housing is to the applicant, so the applicant really understands what they're getting into with the shared kitchen and a shared bathroom. We organize tours if that's helpful for the renter to be able to see what the project looks like. And then it's really matchmaking. It's making sure that the renter knows what they're applying for, and that the renter feels like, yep, this is something that I'm really excited about and I want to be a part of this. From there, the operator has very basic screening criteria, like again, extremely minimal. But it's really about that conversation with the case manager and the renter to say, this is a great place where you want to be.
Great, thank you. Walter?
Yeah, we just leased our Waterloo Terrace community back in December, January. A third of the units were program units. They're part of the coordinated assessment and veterans programs. But the other units, for fair housing reasons, we have to lease first come, first serve. But we had over 1,000 applicants for 100 apartments. So we ended up using a lottery system. That wasn't perfect either, because once we ran the lottery, we got in contact with people, then people didn't show up, and some did, some didn't. But the lottery for us seemed like the most fair way to take an overwhelming pool of applicants, rather than try and set a date and time, and then people have to try and get access on the web for it.
Great. Yeah, thank you for that. We have a few minutes left, about 2 minutes. Any questions that I didn't see in the chat box? Anyone want to raise their hand or resubmit it in the chat box? You can also, like I said, ask it out loud. If not,
I have one last thought I wanted to
yeah, absolutely.
share. Our model is what we call a low barrier model. It's not a pure housing first model. I just want to encourage folks to there are lots of housing models, lots of variety of design and approaches, and frankly, we need them all. Folks in need, not one size doesn't fit everybody. I'm trying, where sometimes people get really hung up that there's one way to do it. I'm trying to avoid those conflicts and do what we know that works really well, and encourage and support the other groups out there and the models they've got.
Yeah, great. I have one last question, and then we will close it out. But has anyone tried repurposing unused malls for housing? This is from Heather Toretta. Unused malls for housing. No.
No, I love that idea.
Yeah, good thinking outside the box. Great. Well, thank you all. Thank you to Megan, to Julia, and to Walter for your expertise and sharing what you all have been doing in your respective states and cities. Like I mentioned, we'd appreciate your feedback on the workshop. So we will put a poll up. It's very, very quick, a little evaluation poll at the end. Also, the slides will be shared with you in the chat box. So make sure you look at that so that you can have the links to these awesome slides. And also remember to check out the remaining schedule of sessions at resilientcommunitiesforum.org. There are several more lined up, and thank you again. So if we can put up those links, Noga, that would be awesome. And have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you.
And there is that the presentation links. So make sure you click on those. And then please take less than a minute to fill out that poll. Seconds to answer. When we get that poll out there, that'd be awesome. No good. Did I miss the poll? I haven't seen it pop up yet.
The poll is up. We are getting respondents.
Oh, perfect. Okay.
I haven't seen it.
It's nothing like seeing how you did in real time. Looks like most people got something out of it.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Yolanda, for leading us through this. And thanks, Walter and Julia, for all the tremendous information you shared.
Yeah, great to meet you all.
Take care.
Thank you.